Dragon Reborn.
The Wheel of Time Season 2 Episode 6 is called Eyes Without Pity. There are only a few moments of levity in what was otherwise a very heavy episode, but there are still several new terms and secrets to discuss, so let's unravel the episode to make sense of it all. This is Unraveling the Pattern. I'm Lauren. This video is safe for show watchers and non-book readers, but please check the description for a detailed spoiler warning. Two quick corrections from my previous Unraveled video. In episode 5, we learned that High Lord Turok is the leader of the Hailene. I said the Hailene means the return, but I was mistaken. The Hailene refers to the Forerunners, or those who come before. In other words, High Lord Turok and the others who arrived in Falme with their ribbed-sailed ships are just a small group from the Seanchan Empire who were sent ahead of the Empress to pave the way for the return. The Old Tongue term for the return is actually the Korene, which hasn't yet been said in the show. And when Liandrin was talking to Nynaeve about the Three Oaths, she talked about a king from 1,000 years ago, but I failed to mention that this king was already named in Season 1. When asked what she knew of the Three Oaths, Egwene told Moiraine they're the promises made by the Aes Sedai to end Artur Hawkwing's siege of the White Tower. So the name of the king who forced the Oaths on the Aes Sedai was Artur Hawkwing. We don't fully know yet why the siege was taking place or how King Artur had enough power to threaten the Aes Sedai in the first place, but I will say, if it wasn't obvious, King Artur intentionally sounds a lot like King Arthur. Robert Jordan often used names and cultures from our history and myths to inspire the myths and legends of the world of the Wheel of Time. The Seanchan claim that someone named Luther Pendrag promised them that one day they would return to reclaim these lands. The name Luther Pendrag is very close to the name of King Arthur's father in Arthurian legend, Uther Pendragon. The show has made some subtle connections between these two people and the Seanchan, and all of this history is revealed in more detail in Book 2, so I think it's safe to discuss it. In the books, Luther Pendrag was Artur Hawkwing's son. The Seanchan symbol is a hawk with wings, in flight, clutching lightning bolts. This represents King Artur Hawkwing, and the Seanchan's ability to control the power of the Aes Sedai in their own hands. So the Seanchan are descended from the same king who threatened to burn down the White Tower 1,000 years ago, the same king who forced or bound the Aes Sedai to the Three Oaths. There's a reason the Seanchan have something against Aes Sedai, and all women who can channel, and why they bind them to the Adem. This entire episode is filled with themes related to binding, brainwashing, and the concept of free will. The Seanchan Adem device is a perfect example of this. The Adem, as we learn from Ryma Sedai, is a ter'angreal or object made from the One Power. We've seen other ter'angreal in the show, like the accepted test arches and the little doorway paintings that Siuan and Moiraine used in Season 1. Sheriam Sedai mentioned that the known use of many ter'angreal has been lost, and that the Aes Sedai have learned to avoid using most of those that remain since the breaking, because many Aes Sedai have been burned out or even killed when experimenting with them. It was very dangerous for Nynaeve, Hailene, and Ryma to channel into the Adem, but after they did, Nynaeve said the Adem needed healing, that it could only feel complete when it was connected to a woman who can channel, and she said it can't be broken. Let's not forget though that Nynaeve said the same thing about Egwene in Season 1. More on that in a bit. Rena, the Sul'dam who is training or really breaking Egwene throughout this episode, mentions that the Adem collar and bracelet ter'angreal that binds Damane to the Sul'dam was created by an Aes Sedai. Egwene doesn't believe it, but that's certainly what the Seanchan think. In the show, the Adem is made of two pieces, the collar on the Damane and the bracelet on the Sul'dam. These pieces are linked by a sort of invisible one-power leash, but in the books the first Adem we see are all one large silver piece. It still has a collar and bracelet, but they're connected by a silver leash, which is a physical part of the device. Later in the books there are Adem collars and bracelets that are still magically linked, but the leash is removed. In the show, it appears the physical leash is used only as a way to chain up the Seanchan slaves, but it's not part of the Adem device. Book and show are mostly the same in the way the Adem functions, but often the show turns it up to 11. First, a Damane cannot remove the collar. Rena tells Egwene she'll wear the collar for the rest of her life, implying that it cannot be removed at all, or at least not by Egwene. In the show, when Egwene attempts to remove it, she feels extreme pain and her muscles lock up. This doesn't happen in the books, but she still can't remove it. Second, if the Damane attempts to touch the bracelet, the Sul'dam's piece, the Damane will also feel pain and cramping in their muscles. In the books, they are able to move it or touch it a little bit. Anything beyond moving it a foot away from where the Sul'dam left it also causes pain, severe muscle cramping, and nausea. Third, any attempts by the Damane to physically hurt their Sul'dam will result in them feeling the pain twice as strong. In the books, the Damane can hurt the Sul'dam, but they still feel the pain twice as strong. But in the show, the Sul'dam seems to be protected by a sort of force field or barrier. The Damane still feels the pain twice over. Fourth, the Sul'dam can torture or cause pain to the Damane through the Adem. Fifth, when the Damane, or Leashed One, and the Sul'dam, or Holder of the Leash, are linked, the Sul'dam can basically sense the Damane's thoughts and feelings, and they can nearly force the Damane to do what they want. Rena calls it an affinity. When Rena encourages Egwene to channel, it isn't just a suggestion. Egwene strongly feels the urge to do what Rena tells her to. And sixth, a Damane cannot even think about using an object as a weapon. In the books and show, Egwene thinks about using a pitcher of water to attack Rena, and then Egwene is unable to even touch the pitcher of water for days, until she convinces herself that she would never use it as a weapon. Did you notice that the pitcher of water was in the very first shot of the episode? Even more terrible than the dehumanizing ter'angreal are the people who make use of it. If you aren't comparing the Seanchan to colonizers with dangerous weapons, perhaps you aren't paying attention. The Seanchan literally treat Damane like animals. Ingtar tells Loial that the Damane are kept in a place called the Kennels. Rena pats Egwene on the head like a dog. Sometimes I felt a sort of sympathy for Rena, and then I remembered just what she was doing and who she was, and I hated her all over again. This is exactly what the books tell us about the Sul'dam, but the show is better at showing it to us. The Sul'dam, in their own way, are just as brainwashed and conditioned as the Damane. Well, maybe not exactly the same. Obviously, the Damane have it worse, but the Sul'dam truly believe that what they're doing is right. In a way, Rena is also a victim of the Seanchan system. Props to Zelia Mendez-Jones for doing such a phenomenal job at making me love to hate Rena. By the way, Zelia Mendez-Jones prefers the pronouns he, him, or they, them. But because he's playing a Sul'dam in the show, I'll refer to Rena, the character, as she. One last detail about Egwene's storyline before we move on. When they revealed Maigon, the sitter of the Blue Aja, who we first met in Season 1, did you notice that she had a bed and some other furniture in her room? I'm assuming these items were given to her as a sort of reward for being an obedient Damane. It'll be interesting to see if Egwene ends up getting some furniture in her room as the show progresses. Moving on, Loial and Ingtar were also taken as Dakovale, or Seanchan property. I hate everything the Seanchan stand for, and Suroth is clearly the worst. She makes this gathering all about her, telling the Blood that she has more Damane than Turok, as a way to try and make her look better than him. One of the bright spots in this scene, though, was being able to witness Ogier Treesinging, though it was diminished a bit by the way in which it was presented. Suroth called Loial a gardener, and later Ingtar called Loial a builder. The Seanchan use Ogier as gardeners in the books. The Ogier are able to grow and shape plants with their singing. This was featured in one of the Wheel of Time Origins animated videos from Season 1. The Ogier also use their talents to shape stone and rock. Most of the city of Tar Valon was built by Ogier, which is why Ingtar called Loial Builder. They also helped the Aes Sedai to grow the ways and the waygates in the books. Anyway, I hated how Suroth treated Loial like a clown who only existed for her entertainment. When she saw that some of the other nobles actually seemed to feel something for Loial and to resonate with his tree singing, Suroth immediately drew the attention back to her by laughing at Loial as a way to get the other nobles to laugh at him along with her. She called Loial it and mentioned gifting him to Turok as a sort of joke, dehumanizing or de-ogierizing Loial in the process. Later, Ingtar seems more interested in recovering the Horn of Valir than he is about Egwene. He says the horn is hidden in a room of Turok's curiosities that's not very heavily guarded. This is something that I think is important to note for later. I wonder what other curiosities we might get to see in Turok's stash. Could there be more ter'angreal? Perhaps a redstone doorframe? Loial, of course, is more appropriately concerned for Egwene's safety. He says that underneath her sweet exterior, there is steel, and if anyone can survive the kennels, it's her. This breaks my heart knowing what's coming for Egwene. In Season 1, Nynaeve said something similar. She tells a story about Egwene's resilience, and then Nynaeve says, Egwene is many things, but above all else, she's unbreakable. Sadly, without getting too much into the details, Egwene was pretty much broken by the end of the episode. I don't want to dive too deep into the tactics that were used, but one thing that stood out to me is that Rena mentioned that Egwene finds comfort in the tree outside of her window, and yet one of the first things Rena makes Egwene do is to destroy the tree. Another really cool detail that I can't take credit for was noticed by another wonderful YouTube channel that you should definitely check out called Road to Tar Valon. They reminded us that water is often used in the show to represent channeling, and then Rena eventually forces Egwene to pour her water into Rena's cup, symbolizing that Egwene is even giving up her ability to channel over to Rena. Such a heartbreaking yet brilliant moment. I thought it was also such a brilliant choice to show Ryma Sedai literally breaking the bones of an enemy Sul'dam while showing Egwene being broken down at the same time. I don't just want justice for Egwene, I want vengeance. I won't spoil what happens, but I did want to point out one interesting detail that might be important for later. Did you notice that when Egwene is channeling, there was a very subtle rainbow lens flare effect around Rena? Thanks to Ryan Sedai on Twitter for pointing out that detail. This same rainbow effect can be seen around Rand when he channels in front of Logain. Speaking of Rand, when last we saw him, Rand had chosen to face Lanfear in the dream. This image of Rand tied to the wheel is a strong metaphor for the dragon's fate as the prophesied hero who is reborn again and again to face the shadow. Like this imagery suggests, Rand feels like he has no free will. In episode 4, he said the wheel doesn't give anybody what they want, especially him. Lanfear, as Hailene, told Rand that nobody gives you what you want. You have to take it. It's funny hearing that from her, considering the fact that she's expecting the Dark One to give her what she wants. It might look like she's taken the dragon for herself, but it must be frustrating for her that Rand isn't fully hers as she was promised. Interestingly, we've heard why many people have chosen to follow the Dark One, or at least to work with Ishamael, and what they have been promised. But up to this point, we still haven't seen anybody actually get what they want. Lanfear wanted Lews Therin. Liandrin wanted to keep her son alive. Ishamael claims he wants to end suffering. Even Min has been promised by Ishamael that her ability to see visions of the future, what she considers to be a curse, can be taken away. So far, none of these people's desires have been fulfilled. Can the Dark One even give people what they're promised? Anyway, the dragon might just be the key to the Dark One's plans, or at least to Ishamael's plans. For some reason, Ishamael seems to believe that the dragon is best left alive to join him rather than dead. Then we have Lanfear, who wants Rand for herself. Does she love him or his power? And then there's Moiraine, and the Aes Sedai, and Rand's friends, and Rand's feelings of responsibility for the entire world. It's complicated, but this image of Rand being tied to the wheel isn't just about his link to the Wheel of Time. It's also about how he's pulled every which way like a Stretch Armstrong toy from the 70s. He feels stretched by so many competing interests. The wheel is almost like a torture device. Ishamael certainly sees it that way. Perhaps the best way to end all this suffering really is to end the turning of the wheel itself, by breaking the wheel and the dragon. This imagery also gives me the impression of puppets and other powers pulling the strings. Who or what is really running the show? Does Rand have any choice? Or is he just a puppet dancing on someone else's strings? Is Lanfear the puppeteer? Speaking of Lanfear, she appears to have one of those strange rings that we've seen before, that Ishamael has, and that Lews Therin and Latra Posay had back in the Age of Legends. I still have no idea what this is, but I like the theory that it's sort of like the Age of Legends version of the Aes Sedai ring. Perhaps it's another Ter'angreal. Lanfear calls Rand Lews Therin and says he's similar to his past self because he thinks he has to stay away from his friends to keep them safe, and because he can be authoritative, which Lanfear appears to like a lot. Look at that lip bite. Lanfear says she's been protecting Rand's dreams from Ishamael. She also tells Rand Ishamael can get to his friends, whom she mentions by name, and that he'll turn them to the Dark One. Rand says they'll never turn, but Lanfear says she thought that about herself once. Lanfear claims that Moiraine is the one who's pulling the strings, that Moiraine got Rand and Logain to Cairhien so they could meet. Moiraine confirms this after Rand wakes up. Lanfear also tells Rand she'll help him if he separates himself from Moiraine, which he does. Later, in a repeat dream, Rand is presumably being taunted by Ishamael, and Lanfear shows up, calls him Ishi, which was a pleasant surprise to hear, and then she sends Ishamael away. Now, I don't personally believe for a second that Lanfear is working against Ishi in this episode. I'm not even sure Ishi was here at this moment. I think Lanfear wants Rand to think she's working against Ishamael, but I don't know that she is. It's the good cop, bad cop routine. Even when Lanfear goes to Liandrin to recruit her out from under Ishamael, I'm not sure Lanfear is acting outside of her orders from Ishi, but I guess we'll just have to continue watching to find out. While on the subject of Liandrin, wasn't this scene just so heartbreaking? This is another example of people being broken down in this episode. Kate Fleetwood deserves all of the awards for this. I can't believe Liandrin's son is gone, but also I thought this was a brilliant way to not only give us more backstory for Liandrin, but also a reminder that even though Dark Friends might swear oaths in order to get something from the Dark One, whether they get that thing or not is irrelevant. Regarding the oaths, Lanfear says, you cannot take them back, it's impossible. Though I tried throwing people off in a previous Unraveled video, I'm guessing Liandrin was really the Aes Sedai at the Dark Friends social at the beginning of Season 2. She was part of Ishamael's group of Dark Friends, but now, whether Ishi knows or not, Liandrin now thinks she works for Lanfear. Anyway, back to Rand. Lanfear offers a bit of an olive branch and shows Egwene to Rand. Rand reaches out to touch Egwene, and then Lanfear brings Rand back. This could actually be very important, because in the books they explain that if a man who can channel touches the Adam device, it can kill the Damane and the male channeler. Rand then tells Lanfear he'll do anything. I think this is partially true, but I also think that Rand is tricking Lanfear a bit here, just like he and Moiraine agreed to. Of course, Rand wants to know where Egwene is and how to help her, but he also wants to convince Lanfear that he's desperate and will do anything she asks, so she'll trust him. Also, it's very important to note that it wasn't just some vision that Lanfear showed Rand. Egwene saw Rand, too. Probably my favorite lighthearted moment in this episode was when Rand and Mat reunited. Rob Christensen, the creator of this awesome map that I use in many of my videos, pointed out to me that the dialogue that Rand overhears from Mat while he's gambling was almost identical to what Mat's first lines were in the show. I thought that was a really fun detail. Rand tells Mat he thought his friends would be better off, safer even, without him. Mat tells Rand they aren't better off, and then Rand says the same thing to Mat. Mat has been staying away because he thinks he's dragging down his friends, but Rand helps him to recognize he's not only wanted, but needed. It felt like a nice counter to the scene between the two of them in Tar Valon in Season 1, where they both said they had each other's backs, but at the time, Mat didn't seem to mean it. Now he seems to really care. The way he lights up with Rand and has a bounce in his step as he runs to Min was just so great to see. Rand also tells Mat that he's going to Falme, and Mat offers to come with him just after he does one quick thing and breaks a woman's heart. Another reference to breaking. My favorite bit between these two characters is when Mat sort of half-mockingly cheers and says, "Dragon Reborn" to Rand. Something interesting I noticed between Mat and Min is that nobody told Min about Falme. Yes, Ishamael told her he wanted Mat and Rand together, but he didn't mention Falme. Still, she knew about it. It's another evidence that her ability to see the future isn't all bad. Min finally comes clean and tells Mat about her vision, where Mat will kill Rand. Mat, of course, thinks she set him up, which she did, but that doesn't make what she says any less true. The intriguing thing to me is that Ishamael also somehow knew about that vision, or seemed to. So this led me to wonder if maybe Min's visions can't all be trusted, because perhaps Ishi is messing with Min in some way. None of this happens in the books, so I'm legitimately unsure about this. In the books, Min's visions always come true 100% of the time, though not always in the way we expect. There have been some great theories about Mat killing Rand, but I feel like they're too spoilery to get into for now. I was absolutely devastated when Mat chose to stay behind. This line from Rand pretty much sums up his whole character arc for much of the book series when he says, "Alone it is." This leads Rand to have a run-in with Lan and Alanna and her warders. Lan tells Rand he can't leave Cairhien. There isn't much to discuss about Lan's storyline, but I am happy that he's finally realigned with Moraine's location. So let's rewind again. I will say the place where Lan, Alanna, Maxim, and Ivan meet with the Forsaken statues was a pleasant surprise. I don't have time in this video to do a deep dive into these statues, but I look forward to doing that more after Season 2 is over. I will say there are definitely 8 statues here, so I'm guessing the theory that there are 8 Forsaken in the show instead of the 13 from the books is all but confirmed at this point. I don't love how the warders assume Lan is a dark friend, but it does make sense when you realize that both Moiraine and Lan have been extremely quiet about their mission for the past 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised if Alanna offered to help Moiraine with Lan specifically because she was suspicious of Moraine's true intentions. Lan finally comes clean and says they found the Dragon Reborn. Then we get this wonderful surprise where we get to see Siuan Sanche. I'd love seeing her Flame of Tar Valon seal, and I love this cool thing she did with channeling a crown of air knives around her head. Some people were confused about how Siuan went so quickly from this place, with Lan, to Cairhien with the 14 Aes Sedai, most of which were last seen in Tar Valon, but it makes sense to me that she was probably almost back to Tar Valon from her trip to Caemlyn. I'm sure once she heard from Lan, she rushed back to the tower and left within a day. Tar Valon and Cairhien are relatively close. I imagine it only took a day or two from the time that Lan found the Amyrlin until they arrived in Cairhien. Could the fact that the Amyrlin is showing up in full regalia and she has summoned Moiraine mean that perhaps we'll finally learn what Min's vision meant from Season 1 when she told Moiraine that she saw the Amyrlin in full regalia and she would be Moraine's downfall? Anyway, I'm sure we'll see more of the Aes Sedai and Siuan in the next episode, but I wanted to point out one more detail about Siuan. In Season 1, we got a pretty clear look at Siuan's chest tattoos. In these shots of her coming out of the carriage, her tattoos do not match. There's been some fan theorizing about this, including some speculation that perhaps this is not actually Siuan, but someone else in disguise. I suppose that could be true, but I noticed in this other shot that suddenly her tattoo is more detailed and matches her tattoo from Season 1. You can see these parts of the tattoo here in this shot, but they aren't visible in the same location on her skin in this shot. So I'm guessing this is just a continuity error. They probably thought they didn't need to apply the full thing for some of the wider shots. I do still like the imposter theory though, and I hope it's true. Okay, let's talk a bit about Moiraine. First of all, how cute was Barthanes with his little sandwiches? Another fun, lighthearted bit. I'm glad that Moiraine finally humbled herself a bit and apologized and made up with Barthanes. But overall, Moraine's storyline this episode was tough for me. She's really becoming an unlikable person in some ways. Let's rewind again. Moiraine is trying to communicate to Siuan in a letter that she's been stilled. When I first saw that, I was shocked. We've been speculating for months, years even, whether Moiraine was stilled or just shielded at the end of Season 1. And suddenly she just came out and said it in her letter? Aes Sedai can't lie in letters any more than they can lie out loud. But then I remembered Aes Sedai can lie if they think they're telling the truth. I'm still convinced that Moiraine only thinks she's stilled, when in reality I think she'll learn she was shielded and that it was tied off by Ishamael. Perhaps Rand will see the weaves and finally be able to help her recover her power. I still love the theory that Siuan is good with untying knots and she'll help Moiraine in some way. Anyway, I couldn't help but dislike Moiraine at this point when she refused to tell Enver anything she's been going through. That said, I have a theory that in the show, Moiraine might have sworn an actual oath not to divulge her secret about the Dragon Reborn to most people. I think only a very small handful of people knew about the prophecy she overheard when she was younger. More on that another time, but I will say that with that in mind, it's much more bearable for me to see Moiraine refuse to talk to people. I even felt for Moiraine at this moment. Imagine carrying the weight of the secret that she carries, and she physically cannot share them because of oaths she made to keep them secret, even from her own family. Remember how Moiraine was pressed by Siuan in Season 1 to divulge what she had been up to the Hall of the Tower, and Moiraine said she could not say, not that she would not. Back to Rand. We did get one quick scene between Rand and Logain. It was cool to see Logain playing Stones, which is a popular board game in the books that's based on the actual game called Go. It has black and white stones, which represent the different halves of the One Power, or the light and the shadow. It seemed like Logain was playing Stones with someone. Perhaps he still sees hallucinations of people because of his madness. Anyway, one of my biggest concerns about the show is that they continue to downplay the differences between the male and the female halves of the One Power. I still hope we'll get more explanation about all of that in good time, but I will say that when Logain began training Rand, at first I was a little disappointed by the wording that Logain used. He said, "embrace the source," which is a word mostly used to describe women touching the One Power in the books. When men do it, most often they're told to seize the source, rather than embrace it. But then I realized this is essentially what Logain was telling Rand. He says, "You need to grab it. You're surrendering to it, boy." They probably should have just switched those two lines. "You're surrendering to it, boy. You need to grab it." Then Rand seems to sort of gain some control and Logain says, "That's it. Make it yours." So even though it was weirdly worded, I do think they were trying to hint at the differences between how men and women access the One Power. Logain helps him to realize that surrendering isn't the way. Of course, Rand still has a lot to learn, so he overwhelms himself with the power and nearly burns himself out. The corruption on the male half of the power causes Rand to vomit. Logain tells him he's so powerful that he can pretty much do anything. Last but not least, I did not expect to fall in love with Ryma Sedai of the Yellow Aja, but her storyline was by far my favorite part of the episode. We could talk about so many things, like how Nynaeve removed her colored cuffs from her accepted dress, or the fact that Ryma mentioned great beasts when talking about the Seanchan, or how Ryma had all these herbs hanging in her house in Falm and she recognized that Nynaeve was a wisdom, or how Ryma finally helped Nynaeve to understand embracing the One Power by comparing it to taking care of her patients. But really, the most standout bits of this storyline were Ryma's relationship with her warder, Basan, and the way she taught us what a true Aes Sedai should be. Did you notice how Ryma and Basan had to put themselves in harm's way before they could fight, just as the 3 oaths require? And how cool was it to see her use the One Power in a more clinical way? Her knowledge of human anatomy as a healer gave her insight into channeling more specific weaves that burned this Sul'dam's flesh and broke this Sul'dam's bones. And their Damani were hurt twice as bad. By far, Ryma was the best embodiment of what an Aes Sedai should be. Regal, caring, helpful, a true servant of all. Her sacrifice in the end was so powerful and genuinely made me tear up. I was so invested in her character and it just felt right, especially how it was juxtaposed with Egwene's suffering. And not only that, somehow in a short time, Ryma seemed to have taught Nynaeve more than Liandrin ever did. Ryma called Nynaeve's sister when she entrusted her ring and those of her other sisters to Nynaeve. Ryma also talked about how she didn't always agree with her fellow Aes Sedai, but there was no question of their loyalty to each other and to their purpose. Later we see Nynaeve and Hailene, who clearly don't always see eye to eye, united in purpose and friendship as they hold hands while watching helplessly as Ryma sacrificed herself to keep them safe. Everyone has a choice, and every choice has a consequence. I truly hope that Ryma will be freed. So we've got Egwene, Nynaeve, and Hailene here in Falm. Perrin was not in this episode, but he's somewhere around here as well, along with Aviendha and Hopper. Almost everyone else is way over here in Cairhien. But now, thanks to Lanfear, Rand has been told that Egwene is in Falm, and he plans to go and get her. Mat also knows, as does Min. It seems like Ishamael and now Lanfear are intentionally pushing everyone to Falm for some reason. Ishamael seems to think Falm is where the last battle will be won, or at least that's what he told Suroth in episode 5. It's beginning to look like we might be getting a reunion of all of the characters in Falm by the end of the season. I can't wait to watch the next episode to find out. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing, and special thanks to all of these awesome supporters. Please consider donating to the good causes in the description, and until next time, let the dragon ride again on the winds of Prime.